The wind howled outside, sharp and bitter like knives. Snow fell heavy over the lonely village, covering every roof, every path, every tree. The night was cold enough to freeze a man's bones. Yet inside a small wooden house at the edge of the forest, an old man sat near his fire. The flames cracked and hissed, giving a little warmth. His name was Elias, and he had lived alone for many years. Elias was not afraid of silence. He was used to it. He had lost his family long ago, and now only the wind and fire kept him company. But that night something broke the silence. A sound, soft but strange, echoed through the storm. Knock, knock. At first, Elias thought it was just the old wood creaking in the cold. But the sound came again. Louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. He frowned. No one ever came to his home at this hour, and in such weather it was almost death to walk outside. He rose slowly, his knees stiff, his back bent with age. He lifted his lantern and moved toward the door. His heart thudded as he pulled it open. The storm rushed in, icy and cruel. But the wind was not the only thing standing there. On the snowy ground lay a figure, small and trembling. It was not human. Elias could tell at once. The skin was pale blue, almost glowing in the light of his lantern. Strange silver markings traced along the arms, shimmering faintly. The figure was thin, fragile, with long hair frozen into strands of ice. It was a girl, but not like any girl Elias had ever seen. Her chest rose and fell weakly. Her lips were blue. She tried to lift her hand, but it fell back against the snow. Elias froze. His first thought was to close the door and pretend he had never seen her. The villagers spoke of monsters in the woods, demons that could trick men with false beauty. They warned that strange creatures brought curses. But as Elias looked down at her, he saw not a monster. He saw a dying child. With a grunt, he stepped forward and bent down. His old hand shook as he lifted her from the snow. She was lighter than he expected. Like carrying a bundle of sticks, her skin was icy cold. Yet beneath it he felt a faint warmth pulsing, as if a strange fire lived inside her. Easy now, he muttered. Though he knew she could not understand, he brought her inside, kicked the door shut against the storm, and laid her near the fire. For a moment he just stood there, staring at her. The glow of her markings reflected in the flames, casting strange shapes along the walls. Was she dangerous? Should he have left her? The girl's lips parted and a soft breath escaped. Her eyes flickered open for only a second, large, bright, and filled with fear. They locked with his, then closed again. Elias sighed. He could not throw her back into the snow. Whatever she was, she needed warmth. He pulled an old wool blanket from his bed and wrapped it around her. Then he placed a pot over the fire and filled it with water and herbs. Hours passed. The storm raged outside. But inside the small house, a strange peace grew. The girl stirred under the blanket, her markings pulsing faintly with light, like the glow of embers when the soup was ready. Elias tried to lift her head gently. Drink, child, he said, pressing the wooden spoon to her lips. At first she did not move, then slowly she sipped. A small sound left her throat, something between relief and pain. As she drank, her glow softened. Her breathing grew steadier. She curled into the blanket like a frightened bird, watching him with half-open eyes. Elias sat back, rubbing his tired face. What had he done? Tomorrow the villagers might come. They would not understand. They would call her dangerous. They would tell him to cast her out. But Elias had already made his choice. He looked at her again, this strange girl from the storm. Her small hands clutched the blanket tightly, as if afraid it would be stolen. For the first time in many years, Elias did not feel alone. The fire burned low, shadows flickering on the walls. The girl's markings glowed softly, painting the cabin in light that was not human. Elias whispered to himself, stranger you may be, but tonight, you're safe here outside. The storm screamed against the windows. Inside, an old man and a lost alien girl shared the fragile warmth of kindness. Neither knew that this night was only the beginning. A season was coming, and with it everything would change. The morning came slow. The storm had calmed, but snow still lay heavy on the ground. Elias rose from his chair with stiff bones. His eyes went to the corner of the room, where the strange girl still slept near the fire. Her body was wrapped in his blanket. Her silver blue hair spread across the pillow. The glowing marks on her skin pulsed gently. Like breathing light, Elias watched for a moment, unsure if she would wake at all. Finally, her eyes opened. They were wide, shining with colors he had never seen, a mix of silver and violet. She looked around the cabin quickly, like a small animal trapped in a cage. Her gaze landed on Elias and she froze. He raised both hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Easy, child," he said softly, though he knew she could not understand. The girl sat up a little, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Her lips parted as if to speak. But only a strange sound came out. It was soft like music, but broken, not human words. Elias frowned. "You don't know my tongue, do you?" The girl tilted her head, her silver markings flickering faintly. She hugged the blanket tighter. Her stomach growled. The sound loud in the quiet room. Elias sighed. He reached for the pot near the fire, filled the wooden bowl and pushed it gently toward her. The smell of broth filled the air. For a moment she hesitated, staring at the food with wide eyes, then like a starving child, she grabbed the bowl and drank quickly. Hot liquid spilled down her chin, but she did not stop. Elias had never seen hunger like that before. When she finished, she looked at him, her lips trembling, her eyes softened, the fear in them melting just a little. Elias nodded. "There you go," he muttered. His voice was rough, but there was warmth in it for a long time. They simply sat in silence, only the crackle of the fire and the whistle of the wind outside filled the cabin. Elias studied her carefully. Every movement, every flicker of her glowing skin felt otherworldly, yet there was something painfully human in the way she clutched the bowl, like it was treasure. At last she placed the bowl down and whispered something. Her voice was soft, shaky. It was not a word he knew, but the sound carried gratitude. Elias could feel it. He pointed to himself. "Elias," he said, pressing his hand to his chest. The girl blinked, confused, but then slowly touched her own chest. She said a word, broken, hard to catch, but it sounded like Sira. Elias repeated it carefully. Sira. Her eyes widened just a little, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips. It was quick, almost hidden, but Elias saw it for a moment. The cabin did not feel so empty, but outside, the village was already stirring. The storm had left the roads buried. Yet men and women began to dig paths. Whispers spread quickly. Strange lights had been seen last night near the old man's house. Someone swore they heard voices carried on the storm. Voices not human by midday. Elias noticed shadows passing his windows. He stiffened. He knew the village would not stay silent for long. Sierra, too, seemed to sense something. She pulled the blanket tighter, her eyes darting toward the door. The silver glow on her arms brightened. Pulsing fast like a heartbeat, Elias frowned. He did not understand what it meant, but he could tell she was afraid. There was a knock, strong and heavy this time, not like the soft one from last night. Elias's face darkened. He opened the door to find 3 men from the village standing outside, snow clinging to their boots. "Elias," one of them said, his tone sharp. "What did you bring into your home last night?" Elias narrowed his eyes. "What business is it of yours?" The man stepped closer. People saw light, strange light. "Monsters live in these woods. You know the stories." Inside, Sierra shifted, her glow leaking through the cracks of the blanket. Elias moved quickly, blocking the men's view. "There is nothing here but firelight," he said firmly. The men exchanged uneasy looks, but one of them muttered, "Be careful, old man. If you protect something cursed, the whole village will pay." They left, their eyes still filled with suspicion. Elias shut the door hard. His hand shaking, he leaned against it, breathing heavily. When he turned, Sierra was watching him, her wide eyes full of fear. He shook his head. "Don't worry, child, they won't take you." But inside, he was not so sure. As night fell again, the wind outside grew cold once more. Inside the cabin, Elias sat by the fire while Sierra curled under the blanket. Her glowing marks dimmed and brightened like stars. She watched him with quiet eyes, never speaking, never asking, just waiting. Elias thought of the villagers' warnings. He thought of the danger. But as he looked at her, he remembered the silence of his lonely nights. He remembered the weight of years spent alone. Now, for the first time in so long, there was someone breathing in his home, someone watching the fire with him. And even though she was silent, she was no longer a stranger. She was his guest, and he would not turn her away. Yet outside, the whispers in the village grew louder, and in the shadows of the forest, other eyes were watching, waiting for the right moment. The season was changing, and with it the fate of them both. The snow had stopped falling, but the village did not rest. Paths were cleared, fires burned, and voices carried through the cold air. But louder than the sound of shovels and axes were the whispers. "They say the old man shelters something. A creature. muttered one woman as she pulled her child close. Another man nodded. Strange lights, silver and bright, came from his cabin last night. I saw them with my own eyes by the well. Two hunters exchanged nervous glances. If it's true, it could bring danger on us all. We should tell the council. Let them decide. Whispers spread like smoke, reaching every ear. The villagers had always been suspicious of Elias. He lived alone, away from the heart of the village. He spoke little, and his eyes carried too many years of sorrow. Now, with rumors of glowing lights and strange noises, fear grew quickly. Inside his cabin, Elias sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. His gaze shifted toward the corner where Sira sat quietly, her blanket wrapped tightly around her small frame. She looked at the flames, but her eyes kept flicking toward him, watching carefully. Her markings glowed faintly in the dim light, no longer wild and bright as on that first night, but calm, steady. Elias found himself staring longer than he should. Her presence filled the silence he had once welcomed, but it also brought questions he could not answer. Why had she come to his door? What was she running from? And most of all, what was she becoming? Sira tilted her head, noticing his eyes on her. Slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed toward the window. Then she whispered a word, broken, strange. Elias leaned closer. What did you say? She repeated the word, softer this time. Her hand trembled and her glow pulsed faster. Elias frowned. Danger? He guessed, but she only lowered her head. Pulling the blanket closer, a knock shook the door. Sharp and sudden, Elias stood quickly. He opened it to find a man from the council, Heron. Tall and heavy-shouldered, his face was grim. Behind him stood two other villagers. Elias, Heron said, his tone like iron. The council has heard rumors. People say you are hiding something. We've come to see. Elias's jaw tightened. There is nothing here but me and my fire. Heron's eyes narrowed. Strange lights, strange noises, you know the rules. If something unnatural is near, we must protect the village. Inside, Sira shifted. The glow from her markings pulsed faintly through the cracks in the blanket. Elias moved quickly, standing in the doorway to block their view. You will not search my home, he said firmly. His voice carried the strength of a man who had lived through many storms. The villagers looked uneasy. Heron's eyes burned with suspicion. But he did not push past the old man. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice dropping low. Be careful, Elias. The village will not forgive you if your kindness brings us ruin. They left, their boots crunching in the snow. Elias shut the door hard, his heart pounding. He turned to find Sira staring at him, wide-eyed for the first time. She spoke his name, broken but clear. Elias, the sound startled him, but it filled the room with a warmth no fire could give. He nodded slowly. Yes, Elias. The days passed, and winter held the village in its frozen grip. The river was a line of ice, the trees stood bare, and smoke rose from every chimney as people fought the cold. Yet around Elias's small cabin, something unusual began to happen. The snow near his doorstep did not stay. Patches of green pushed through the white, tiny shoots of grass that should not exist in such weather. Even the withered tree beside his house showed small buds. As if spring had come too soon, Elias noticed it first at dawn, when he stepped outside with his old walking stick. He frowned, his boots crunching in the snow, but not where Sira had walked the night before. There the ground was soft, the frost melted. He turned slowly toward the cabin, his heart heavy with questions. Inside, Sira sat near the fire, her silver markings glowing brighter than before. They pulsed in slow rhythm, like a heartbeat, sometimes faint, sometimes strong, and each time the air around her seemed warmer. She looked up as Elias entered. Her violet eyes watched him carefully. She said his name again, broken but clearer than before. Elias. The sound made his chest tighten. He set down his stick, rubbing his tired hands. Child, what are you becoming? He muttered, but softly, as though speaking only to himself. Sira tilted her head. She did not understand the words, but she felt the weight in his tone. She reached out, touching his sleeve, and whispered her own name, Sira. Elias sighed. Yes, Sira. That night, the glow from her markings filled the cabin. The fire burned low, yet the room was warm. Elias woke in the middle of the night, sweat on his brow. He glanced at Sira, who lay wrapped in the blanket, her glow spreading across the floor like silver water. He did not sleep again, not with questions gnawing at his mind. By morning, the village was restless. Rumors had become certainty. Children whispered that the old man's house was cursed. Women crossed themselves as they passed the road toward the forest. Men sharpened their blades, muttering about the danger that grew while the council hesitated. At the tavern, Heron's voice rose above the crowd. "Look around you. Snow melting where it should not melt. Trees blooming when they should be dead. If this is not a curse, then what is it?" But an older woman shook her head. "Or perhaps it is a blessing. Did you not see Elias last year, hunched and broken? Now he walks with fire in his eyes again. Perhaps this creature has given him life," the crowd argued, torn between fear and hope. But fear has sharp teeth, and it bites quicker than hope ever can. Back in the cabin, Elias sat across from Sira, watching her eat. She held the spoon carefully now, not like the starving child of before. Her hands were steadier, her glow brighter. She looked healthier every day, and yet less human. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and walked to the window, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the storm clouds were fading, but the snow still clung to the earth. Sira placed her hand against the glass, and slowly the frost melted beneath her touch, leaving clear lines on the pane. Elias rose quickly. "Stop," he whispered. Though his voice was weak, she turned, confused. Her eyes wide, he shook his head. "If they see, they'll take you." She stepped back. Lowering her hand, her glow dimmed a little. For the first time, Elias saw sadness in her expression, as if she knew she was a danger to him that night. Elias dreamed of fire and silver light. He dreamed of Sira standing in the snow, the whole forest blooming around her while men with spears shouted in fear. He woke with a start, his old heart racing. He sat up, staring into the fire, and whispered to himself, "This season, it is not winter, it is her." Sira stirred. She opened her eyes and whispered something in her strange tongue. The glow on her skin pulsed with warmth. Elias did not understand her words, but he felt their meaning. Change was coming, and it could not be stopped. By the next morning, the proof was undeniable. The entire yard around his cabin had turned green. Small flowers pushed through the soil. Birds returned to the trees, singing. Though the rest of the village remained buried in snow, Elias stood outside with his stick, staring at the miracle, his breath caught in his throat. He felt awe, but also fear. The villagers would not call this a blessing. They would call it witchcraft, and witchcraft always led to fire. He turned back toward the cabin. His eyes met Sira's through the window. She watched him with quiet trust. Her hands pressed together as though asking him for something he could not yet give. Elias whispered, "I cannot keep you hidden much longer." But he already knew the truth, whatever Sira's season of change was. It was only just beginning, and the village, or the world itself, would never be the same once it was complete. She touched her chest. "Sira." Then she pointed at him again. "Elias," the way she said it was soft, almost trusting. It was the first bridge between their worlds, and Elias felt it deep in his tired heart. But outside, the whispers only grew that evening. The tavern was filled with low voices and fearful eyes. Some argued that Elias had always been odd, always keeping to himself. Maybe now the truth was showing. One man slammed his mug on the table. "If he shelters a creature, we are all in danger. Better to drag it out now before it brings death on us." Others shifted uncomfortably, fear twisting into anger. Yet a few stayed silent, their eyes troubled. They remembered Elias's kindness in years past. They remembered a man who had once been strong and good, even if life had left him broken by the time night fell. The village was divided, half afraid, half uncertain, but all eyes turned toward the lonely cabin by the forest. Inside, Elias and Sira sat together in silence. The old man's hands trembled as he stoked the fire. Sira's glowing marks flickered against the walls. "Strange and beautiful," he whispered to himself. "They won't understand. They never will." Sira looked at him, her violet eyes shining. She did not know his words, but she knew his tone, and slowly she reached out, resting her small hand on his. Her touch was warm, gentle. Elias froze, then let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For years, his house had been filled only with echoes of memory. Now, for the first time, it felt alive again, but far in the distance. Hidden in the forest shadows, another pair of eyes gleamed, watching the cabin. They did not belong to a villager. They did not belong to a friend. Something else had come for the glowing girl, and the whispers of the village were only the beginning. The change around Elias's cabin could not stay secret. By now, half the village had seen it. A ring of green surrounded his home while the rest of the land still lay under snow. Flowers grew where ice should have ruled. Birds sang in the branches though the forest remained silent elsewhere. Whispers turned to anger, anger turned to fear, and fear called for action. One evening, Elias heard voices carrying through the cold air, torches glowing beyond the trees. He stepped outside with his old stick in hand. His breath froze in the wind as three men approached. They were not villagers. Their clothes were thicker, their boots harder, and their eyes sharp with greed. Hunters. Strangers from the northern hills. The tallest of them raised a hand. "Old man," he said with a rough voice, "we heard stories in the tavern. They speak of a glowing girl in your house. They say she can melt snow with her touch." His lips curved into a cruel smile. "That kind of power is worth gold. Show her to us." Elias tightened his grip on the stick. "There is no one here but me," the second man laughed. "Your house is blooming like spring while the rest of this cursed land freezes. Do not treat us like fools. Bring her out, or we'll take her ourselves inside the cabin." Sierra stood frozen near the window, her eyes wide, her glow pulsed with panic. Elias glanced back and caught her gaze. He shook his head slowly, silently telling her to stay hidden. He turned to the men. "Leave now," he said firmly, though his voice shook. "What you think you seek does not belong to you." The tall hunter stepped closer, his boots crunching the snow. "Old man, kindness will not protect you. Sell her to us, and we'll leave you coin enough to live the rest of your days in warmth. Refuse, and we take her by force." Elias's chest burned. His heart raced. He was old, his back weak, but he would not let them touch her. Slowly, he stepped back inside and closed the door, sliding the wooden bar into place. The hunters pounded against the door. "Do not test us, Elias," they shouted. "We will burn this house to the ground if you do not hand her over." Sierra clutched the blanket tighter around herself. Her markings glowed brighter, flickering wildly like fire. Elias turned to her, his face pale but firm. "Stay back," he whispered, reaching for the rifle above his fireplace. It had been years since he touched it. The wood cracked, the metal rusted, but it was all he had. The pounding grew louder. The hunters slammed against the door, one blow after another. Dust fell from the beams as the wood groaned. Sierra let out a small cry, her voice soft but filled with fear. Elias lifted the rifle and pointed it at the door. His old hands shook, but his eyes held steady. "Get away," he shouted, his voice echoing through the cabin. "This house is mine, and she is under my roof. You'll not touch her." For a moment, silence fell outside. Then came cruel laughter. "You are only one man, Elias, and an old one at that. You cannot stop us." The door shuddered again, this time cracking slightly. Sierra's glow blazed brighter, the air around her warming. Elias glanced back. Her markings flared like silver fire, and the frost on the window melted in seconds. She raised her trembling hands, light spilling between her fingers. Elias's breath caught. He had seen small hints of her power, but never like this. "No, child," he whispered quickly. "If they see, they'll never stop hunting you." But it was too late. The door split open with a crash and the hunters stormed inside, their eyes locking instantly on the glowing girl. "There," one shouted. "By the stars, it's true!" Before they could move closer, Elias stepped in front of them, rifle raised. "One more step and I'll send you back to the dirt." His voice trembled, but the steel in his eyes froze them for a heartbeat. The tall hunter sneered. "You won't shoot. You're nothing but an old fool clinging to a ghost." He lunged forward. Elias's finger tightened on the trigger, but before the shot rang, a burst of silver light filled the cabin. The hunters staggered back, shielding their eyes. Sierra stood with her arms outstretched, her markings blazing so bright they painted the walls with fire. Heat spread through the cabin. The snow outside the door melted in an instant. The hunters cursed, fear flashing in their eyes. "What is she?" one shouted. Elias moved quickly, slamming the butt of the rifle into the tall hunter's chest. The man stumbled back, falling into the snow. His companions dragged him up, their faces pale. "This is not worth it," one growled. "The girl is cursed." "We'll come back with more." They fled into the night, their torches vanishing into the trees. Leaving only the echo of their threat, Elias dropped the rifle. His chest heaving, he turned to Sierra, who sank to her knees, trembling, her glow dimmed slowly. Flickering like a dying flame, he knelt beside her, placing his rough hand gently on her shoulder. "You saved us," he whispered. "But you must be careful, Sierra. They will return, and they will not come alone." Her eyes lifted to his. Shining with both fear and sorrow, she did not understand all his words, but she understood the weight of them, and for the first time, she whispered something in his tongue. Broken but clear, Father. Elias froze, his heart aching at the sound. The word was fragile, trembling, but it was enough to bind him to her, enough to make his choice clear. No matter what came, he would stand between her and the world, even if it killed him. The night after the hunters fled was not quiet. Elias sat awake by the fire, the rifle across his knees. His old hands trembled, but not from the cold. His mind replayed the silver light that had poured from Sierra's skin, the way the snow melted, the way the hunters had screamed. She was no longer just a frightened girl he had found in the storm. She was something far greater, something powerful, and that power would bring danger to them both. Sierra slept nearby, curled in the blanket. Her glow was faint now, weak after the burst of power she had released. Elias watched her chest rise and fall, and his heart ached. She had called him father, one word, broken but full of meaning. It had been many years since anyone had looked at him like that, many years since he had felt needed. When morning came, Elias stepped outside. The snow had melted even further. His cabin stood on a patch of spring while the rest of the village still shivered in winter. Smoke rose from chimneys, but the people who walked the frozen paths kept glancing toward the forest. Toward him, he knew the hunters would not give up. Greed never sleeps long. Inside, Sierra stirred awake. Her violet eyes opened slowly. She whispered his name. Elias. He turned to her with a small smile, though his eyes were tired. Yes. Child. She rose and walked to him, unsteady but determined. She touched his hand and whispered again, Father. Elias closed his eyes. His chest tightened. He placed his rough, weathered hand over hers. If I am your father, then I will protect you as one. That day passed with uneasy calm. Elias sharpened his old knife, checked the rifle again, and laid extra wood by the fire. Sierra tried to help, though she did not understand his tools. She fetched water, clumsily spilling some, but her smile when she carried the bucket lit the cabin more than the flames. But as the sun fell, shadows gathered. Torches appeared once more beyond the trees. This time more than 3, voices carried through the cold. Hard. Cruel voices, they're here, Elias muttered. His grip tightened on the rifle. Sierra moved closer to him, her small hands clutching his coat. Her glow brightened with fear. The hunters burst into the clearing, at least 7 of them, armed with spears, blades, and axes. The tall one from before stood at the front, his chest still bruised from Elias's strike. His eyes burned with anger. You should have given her to us, old man. Now you'll both pay. Elias lifted the rifle, standing between them and Sierra. You'll not take her. Not while I still breathe. The men laughed cruelly. You're old, Elias. You'll fall before the first swing. Step aside. Sierra clung to him, her glow flickering brighter. She whispered something in her tongue, voice sharp with urgency. Elias did not understand the words, but he felt the meaning. Run. But Elias did not run. He raised the rifle, his hand steady now, his voice hard. Come then. The hunters charged. Snow sprayed beneath their boots. Torches waved in the night. Elias fired. The shot cracked through the air. One man fell, the others cursed. Rushing faster, Sierra screamed, her glow bursting outward. Heat flooded the clearing, melting snow in waves. Flowers bloomed in an instant beneath her bare feet. The hunters staggered, blinded by the silver light. One raised his spear, aiming for Elias. Sierra moved without thinking. Throwing herself forward, her glow blazed like fire. The spear never reached him. It splintered into ash before it struck. Elias grabbed her, pulling her back. No, child. Not like this, he whispered. But his voice was drowned by the chaos around them. The hunters regrouped. Fear mixing with rage. She's a witch, one shouted. Kill her before she burns us all. They rushed again. Elias swung his rifle like a club, striking one across the face. Another lunged, blade flashing. Elias stumbled, his old strength failing then. A sudden burst of light knocked them back. Sierra stood with arms spread, her markings blazing like 1,000 stars. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her voice rang out, not words Elias knew, but sounds filled with pain and defiance. The ground shook. The snow around the cabin melted completely. Trees bent as if bowing to her. The hunters fell back, terror on their faces. This is no girl, one gasped. She's a demon. Oh. Elias stepped forward, his chest heaving. No, he growled. She is no demon. She is my daughter. The hunters hesitated, torn between greed and fear, but the tall one spat. Daughter or demon, she will not live. We'll be back with more men, and nothing will stop us. They fled into the night. Their torches vanishing one by one, silence fell heavy. Only the sound of Elias's ragged breathing remained. Sira collapsed into his arms, her glow fading to a dim flicker. He held her tightly, whispering, "It's all right, child. I've got you." His hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. He knew the hunters would return again, stronger, angrier, but he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He could not abandon her. Not now, not ever. That night, as she slept with her head resting against his chest, Elias stared into the fire. His old heart carried a new vow. If the world wanted to take her, it would have to go through him first. The night after the second attack was long and heavy. Elias did not sleep. He sat by the fire with Sira resting in his arms. Her glow was faint, her strength almost gone, yet even in her weakness she clung to him as if he were her only anchor in the world. Outside, the wind carried whispers of danger. The hunters would not stop, Elias knew it. Greed had already taken root in their hearts, and soon they would return. Not with 7 men, but with dozens. As the hours passed, Elias made his choice. He could not run. His legs were weak, his age heavy. And where would they go? The girl's glow would betray her anywhere. There was only one path left, to stand and face what came. At dawn, the horns of the hunters echoed through the forest. Harsh and cruel, Elias stepped outside with his rifle in hand. The cold air bit his skin, but his eyes burned with defiance. Torches and steel gleamed in the distance. More men than before inside. Sira stirred. Her violet eyes opened. She whispered, "Elias." "Father?" Her voice was broken, weak, but full of fear. He turned to her and forced a smile. "Stay inside, child, no matter what happens. You are not alone," but she shook her head. Her glow flickered brighter. "No." Together, before he could stop her, she stood, her bare feet stepping onto the frost. Everywhere she touched, the snow melted, flowers blooming in her wake. Elias's chest tightened. She was changing again. Her season reaching its peak, the hunters stormed into the clearing, their voices loud. "There! The witch! Kill her before she curses us all." Elias raised his rifle, planting himself between them and Sira. "You'll not take her, you'll not touch her," he shouted. His voice shook, but his stance was unyielding. The men laughed. "Old fool, step aside." But before they could charge, Sira moved past Elias. She spread her arms wide, and her silver markings blazed brighter than the sun. The ground trembled, the frost vanished. The whole clearing bloomed with life. Grass, flowers, even the withered trees bent and sprouted green leaves. The hunters froze, eyes wide. Fear twisted their faces. "What is she?" Juan whispered. "She is not human." Sira's voice rang out, not in human words, but in her own tongue, strong and clear. Her cry carried through the forest like a song. Filled with both sorrow and strength, her glow spread outward, a wave of warmth rolling across the snow. The hunters staggered back, some dropping their weapons. The torches sputtered, flames dying against her light. "Demon!" the tall one screamed. "She'll bring ruin!" But Elias stepped forward, standing beside her. His voice thundered with more fire than his frail body should have carried. "She is no demon. She is my daughter. She brings life, not death." The men hesitated, torn between fear and greed. But when Sira's light burst once more, brighter than dawn, the choice was made. One by one they fled, stumbling through the forest, their cries fading into the distance. When silence returned, Elias fell to his knees, his rifle slipping from his hand. His old body shook with exhaustion. Sira turned, her glow dimming slowly. She rushed to him, kneeling at his side. "Father," she whispered, her eyes wet with tears. Elias smiled weakly, his rough hand cupping her glowing cheek. "You saved me, child, you saved us both." For a long moment, they simply held each other in the middle of the green clearing, the first patch of spring in a land still locked in winter. The sun rose higher, its light mixing with Sira's glow, painting the cabin in colors of gold and silver. The villagers who had come to watch from afar stood in stunned silence. They had expected fire and death, but instead they saw a miracle, life blooming where none should grow. An old man and a strange girl standing together against the world. Slowly, whispers spread. But this time they were not of curses or demons, they were of wonder. "Perhaps she is no curse," one villager murmured. "Perhaps she is a blessing." Elias helped Sira back inside. His step slow but steady. He stoked the fire, though the room was already warm from her presence. He sank into his chair, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Syrah curled beside him, her violet eyes closing. Her glow softened to a gentle shimmer. She whispered one last word before sleep took her. Home. Elias's eyes filled with tears. He looked around his cabin, the cracked walls, the old beams, the worn table, and for the first time, it truly felt alive again. Outside, the snow still covered the land, but around his cabin, spring had already begun. The hunters were gone, the villagers were watching, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath. An old man's kindness had saved a dying stranger, but in return she had given him something greater. Hope, family, and a new dawn, and though the season had changed, one truth remained. Elias and Syrah would face whatever came next, not as strangers but as father and daughter,